We are now joined by Mr. Leslie Maasdorp. He is President of the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Southern Africa, and also speaker at this year's St. Gallen Symposium. Mr. Maasdorp, great to have you again here in St. Gallen, and thank you for your time. Your session was entitled Managing Public Wealth Across Generations. In a nutshell, how can public wealth actually be managed across generations?
Gary, we had a very interesting session yesterday because we had the honor of having the Deputy CEO of the equivalent of the Norwegian oil fund there. The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is probably one of the best, most well-managed in terms of transparency, in terms of how it's governed, of the Sovereign Wealth Fund universe. So we wanted to see what can we learn from this fund that we could replicate elsewhere, because the Sovereign Wealth Fund universe is very, very diverse. And the Norwegians kind of stand out there as a real benchmark. If you think about it this way, over the last 5-6 decades, there's been, certainly in the economics literature, this notion of a resource curse. In other words, countries that have a lot of resources don't necessarily do that well in a long-term perspective. So if you look at growth rates, right, a number of countries that have either oil, diamonds, gold, resources have not actually managed it well across generations. So the Norwegians have taken a very long-term view. And governments, and it's independent of sort of political cycles. So in other words, you cannot have a government deciding one year we're going to, deploy these resources in a particular way. So the first lesson that I think one can extract from the session yesterday was that they've taken a very, very long-term view with respect to what will the country do after they've potentially run out of this resource.
Gita Wirjawan, Minister of Trade of the Republic of Indonesia and also speaker at this year's symposium, is of the opinion that other emerging economies such as Indonesia are underrated tigers. Is South Africa also an underrated tiger, and what is to be expected from your country within the next 5 years?
South Africa is often described as a gateway to Africa. I mean, as you might know, we are the biggest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. We've now also recently joined the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, which gives us a very superb platform from which to position our economy in global terms. I mean, obviously, we are a much smaller economy relative to Brazil, Russia, India, China, but our location is very strategic. So whether it's Brazil coming to invest, in resources on the continent, or whether it's China, Korea, Russia, South Africa is an ideal point from which they could expand, because we've got the infrastructure, with the depth of capital markets, we've got very stable the banking system, well regulated, well managed, the rule of law. There's a whole range of factors that make South Africa an attractive country. We have not really, I think, leveraged as much as we should have from the commodities boom, but I think the country has the potential over the next number of years to join the fast-growing emerging markets of the world.
This year's symposium topic is facing risk. Looking back at your life, what has been the biggest risk you have ever taken?
And I'd say that for me personally and for many South Africans of my generation, we grew up under apartheid. We grew up under a system of racial oppression, a system that was just patently so unjust. So resisting that system, when I was a student your age at university, I played a very leading role in mobilizing other students to take an active role in taking on the government, whether that's in the form of protest marches, whether that's in the form of organizing mass rallies, and basically conscientizing people to take collective action to change. And believing that we could change a government is quite a fundamental sort of realization for someone who's 17, 18, 19, 20. So I would say that at the time, and this is now good to 25 years ago, the biggest risk I took at the time was to actively be an activist for change in South Africa. And, myself, with many of my generation were detained. I spent time in prison. But when I think back of it now, it was not I didn't see it as a risk-taking proposition, but I more saw it as something that I had to do in order to change the environment that I was in.
What motivated you to come back, or to keep on coming back to the St. Gallen Symposium?
Well, firstly, I'm very honored to be invited back to St. Gallen every year. I've been probably my fifth St. Gallen that I'll be attending. I think over time the character of the symposium has also changed. Firstly, when I arrived, it was much more domestic European in focus. Now the agenda the participants, the speakers is much more global in nature. So there's a much stronger participation from Asia, for example, from the Chinese, from Japan and so on. And also now much stronger participation from South Africa. When I came the first time, there wasn't a single South African. Yesterday we had the former Minister of Finance from South Africa, current Minister of Planning, Minister Trevor Manuel on the platform, and it was really great to have a very senior political leader from South Africa at the symposium.
Mr. Maasdorp, thank you very much for your time and your statements. Enjoy your stay at the St. Gallen Symposium.
Thank you very much. Thank you.